For centuries, Europe's royal families were the most powerful, wealthy, and influential people on the continent. But what they lacked in commoners was made up for tenfold by what they had amongst themselves. It was this that would lead to one of the greatest curses in history. The year is 1665 when an infant king comes to power. At first glance, Charles II of Spain appears healthy and normal, just a bit strange-looking, nothing too concerning. But as he grew older, so did his deformities. His lower jaw began to recede further and further back into his head, which left him unable to close his mouth fully. As time went on, this condition got progressively worse until his bottom teeth protruded through his bottom lip. So severe was his condition, in fact, that it became known as the Habsburg Jaw. And it wasn't the only thing that plagued young Charles. He suffered from hypertrichosis, a condition that caused excessive hair to grow all over his body. These physical abnormalities were the result of decades of inbreeding between members of the Habsburg family, an effort to keep the Spanish throne within their bloodline. As the years went on and Charles continued to have children, he passed on these genetic defects, creating some of the most horrifically disfigured humans in recorded history. By the time of Charles's son's birth, his Habsburg jaw was so bad that he could barely speak or eat. This child would be the last male heir of the Habsburg dynasty. With the passing of Charles II, the family line came to an end after ruling over Spain for over 200 years. But in another corner of Europe, another royal family was about to make the same mistake. In the year of 1841, a new monarch took the throne of England, Queen Victoria. While her reign was largely uneventful, she would leave behind a legacy far more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. Like many royal families throughout history, Victoria had many children. In fact, she would give birth to 9. What she didn't know was that something was very wrong with her blood. She was a carrier of hemophilia, a genetic condition that impairs the body's ability to create blood clots, causing those who suffer from it to bleed excessively when injured. What makes this particularly deadly is that there was no known cure at the time. Not only did Victoria pass on this death sentence to 3 of her children, she would inadvertently pass it on to some of the other royal houses of Europe as well. Through marriage, the Russian royal family would be one of the most affected. Victoria's granddaughter, Anastasia, would marry the future King Alexander II of Russia. Upon his accession to the throne, he too would develop hemophilia, but it was his son, Alexei, who would suffer the most. You see, Alexei was not just a hemophiliac, he was also the heir to the Russian throne. This meant that if anything happened to him, his younger sister would become the next in line. But she too suffered from hemophilia. This made it so that the entire Romanov dynasty was hanging by a thread. If either of the siblings died, the other would take their place and eventually pass on the bleeding disease to the next generation, dooming the entire family line. While Anastasia managed to live a relatively normal life, Alexei was not so lucky. The slightest cut or scrape would send him into a fit of uncontrollable bleeding. Even the smallest bruise could prove fatal. For him, this created a very tense environment in the palace where everyone was constantly worried about the safety of the young prince. To prevent Alexei from being hurt, his parents kept him isolated from the rest of the world, never letting him out of their sight. The situation was dire. Without modern medicine, there was no hope of finding a cure for hemophilia, and the royal family was desperate. Then came a mysterious man claiming to have the gift of healing. His name was Gregory Rasputin. Originally a peasant, Rasputin had clawed his way up the social ladder by using his supposed ability to heal the sick and wounded. While there is no evidence that he actually possessed any sort of mystical powers, he was still able to gain quite a bit of notoriety for himself. When word got around that he was able to cure a young boy suffering from hemophilia, it caught the attention of the Russian royal family. They invited Rasputin to the palace to see if he could help their son, Alexei. At first, the results were promising. Alexei's bleeding seemed to slow down and stop in the presence of Rasputin. The royal family was ecstatic and welcomed him into their home. This would eventually cause tension between the royal couple and the rest of the country. You see, while Rasputin was indeed stopping Alexei's bleeding fits, he was doing so by putting the young prince into incredibly dangerous situations. At one point, he allowed Alexei to climb onto a horse without any supervision. He also took him sledding at high speeds and forced him to walk long distances, all in an effort to trigger an adrenaline response that would supposedly help his condition. But it was all for nothing, because Alexei's hemophilia would eventually get the better of him. On July 1908, while playing with his sister, he accidentally cut his foot on some glass. At first, it looked like everything would be fine, but soon enough his wound began to bleed uncontrollably. Despite the efforts of Rasputin, the royal family and their doctors, Alexei would bleed to death before the age of 30. His parents were devastated and would come to resent Rasputin for leading them on false hope. Some historians believe that it was this resentment that eventually led to their demise. After Alexei's death, public sentiment against Rasputin began to turn. The royal family started to listen to these rumors and began to distance themselves from the man who had become a controversial figure in their lives. Enraged by this, Rasputin began spreading rumors of his own, claiming that the royals were planning to assassinate him. While there is no evidence that this was true, it didn't stop him from making it stick in the public's mind. Soon enough, everyone was talking about how the royals had turned on the man who had saved their son. And it was at this point that the royal family realized they had made a terrible mistake. By turning on Rasputin, they had given him nothing to lose. In November of 1916, Rasputin would take his revenge when he wrote a letter to the Tsarina detailing intimate moments that he had shared with the king. This was not only embarrassing for the royal family, but it also cast doubt on Alexei's legitimacy as heir to the throne. Then, just 2 months later, on March 1917, the Russian Revolution broke out, bringing an end to the Romanov dynasty and beginning the era of the Soviet Union. It is believed that Rasputin's letters played a part in this revolution. Because of this, we can say that it was his actions that brought about the downfall of the Romanovs and ended their bloodline. But it wasn't just him. The royal family themselves played a large role in this as well. For decades, they had intermarried with each other, exchanging spouses and ensuring that the throne would stay within the family. But this had unintended consequences, most notably that the Romanov bloodline was severely weakened. This made it much easier for someone like Rasputin to exploit them and eventually bring about their demise. In the end, the curse of the royal families was the same thing that had taken down the Habsburgs, the isolationist policies that had kept them in power for so long. It was this desire to hold on to power and wealth that had blinded them to the dangers of inbreeding and the importance of modern medicine. And it was these two factors that would eventually lead to their genetic ruin.